Okay, let's get started. Next slide. Thank you. We have an amazing presenter for this session. Dr. Brinen is a primary developer of recovery-oriented cognitive therapy along with Aaron T. Beck, MD. Under the guidance of Dr. Aaron T. Beck, Dr. Brinen has worked to formalize the treatment recovery-oriented cognitive therapy adapted to a group model, team-based approach, and milieu. He is a co-author in the upcoming manual for CTR for schizophrenia and has been active in the training of community therapists from around the world. Dr. Brinen is an assistant professor in the Drexel College of Medicine Department of Psychiatry, where he directs a center for the dissemination, development, study, and practice of recovery-oriented cognitive therapy for psychosis. Additionally, he trains psychiatry residents in CTR. Dr. Brinen is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in cognitive behavior therapy for individuals with schizophrenia, PTSD, and other disorders. In addition to training, research, and treatment development, Dr. Brinen has a small practice where he sees individuals. Dr. Brinen is also a trainer for the Academy of Cognitive Therapy and was a faculty member at the Beck Institute, where he trains nationally and internationally on a variety of topics, including CBT for schizophrenia and PTSD. Thank you, Aaron, for being with us today. Aaron, I'll pass it off to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to, I feel really fortunate to finish this off. Even more than that was, while I was getting that wonderful introduction, my whole Zoom crashed. So if you're having that experience, I know that experience very, very well. So welcome. We just hit 500 participants. So let's get this presentation started for the final keynote. I do really feel fortunate. I want to thank everybody for welcoming me here and having me participate in this conference. So what I'm excited about today is talking for a little while about, for part of the afternoon, about recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, and really thinking about this idea of how do you help the individuals who are least likely to engage in psychosocial treatments, the individuals who struggle with problems with motivation, problems with connecting, what has been traditionally thought of as the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and really introduce people to this intervention that we were able to develop. So let's start with the question of what is recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, right? So recovery-oriented cognitive therapy is a fusion of cognitive therapy, right? The know-how that we love about cognitive therapy. Even people who don't like cognitive therapy, and that's fine if you're one of those people, I'll still be friends with you. Even people who don't like cognitive therapy oftentimes speak about cognitive therapy as being really practical and able to be applied pretty well. But then fusing that with the recovery spirit, that spirit of the recovery movement. Because many of the individuals who I've trained have said, I really like recovery and I feel really passionate about it. But how do you make recovery happen, right? How do you make hope happen, or connection, or purpose? And so what we did is, the idea was that we started to fuse those ideas that are so powerful and come from this, this movement driven by individuals, and then fuse that with the know-how of cognitive therapy. And so Dr. Aaron Beck, it was maybe close to 10 years ago, he was asked by SAMHSA to talk about how are cognitive therapy and the recovery movement alike. And really, Dr. Beck was one of the greatest mentors, because any question he would have to think about, he would expect us to think about too. So he asked all of us to talk to him about how are recovery and cognitive therapy alike. What do they have in common? And all of the people on the team came up with really some of the smartest, most interesting conversations you know, that I've had the pleasure to read. But I was a particularly anxious guy. I was very worried. It was my first year as a postdoc for Aaron T. Beck, and I really felt like there was no way that I was going to be able to, that I really belonged there. So I got very anxious about that. So I would show up an hour before my time began, and I would be reading. And one of the things I found so fascinating was I was reading Cognitive Therapy, the Emotional Disorders. Really the first book that Dr. Beck published on cognitive therapy. And on the 9th page, second paragraph down, Dr. Beck writes about why behaviorism and psychoanalysis, the two primary treatments of the day, would not lead somebody to ultimately go back to the life that they want and that they deserve, right? They wouldn't recover. And why cognitive therapy would. And at the end of that, Beck talks about the idea of helping the patient draw on his own problem-solving apparatus. And so in that idea, Beck knew that within every individual was their ability to recover. And so all the way back in 1976, Beck was writing about recovery in that way. So what CTR, which you're going to hear me refer to it as, which is recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. We call it CTR because if you call it ROCT, everybody calls it ROTC, and they think that we're just sending people off somewhere. CTR is this extension of CBT for psychosis, right, which has maybe 20, 25 years of research behind it. Really wonderful know-how of helping individuals who might have hallucinations or delusions to move forward in their life. But it's an extension of CBT for psychosis to those least likely to engage in those treatments. The individuals who are oftentimes described as sort of lining the walls of the centers that we serve. I think I once asked, do you ever worry that if they all stood up at once, like the walls would fall in? That type of feeling. Those individuals who are not likely to engage in treatment. But in CTR, what we're going to do is we're going to privilege the negative symptoms, those problems with motivation and the problems with connection, right? We're going to put those first, right? And we're going to talk as we go forward about why that's the set of symptoms that we're going to put first. So we're going to be also talking about a little bit of research. So if you really like research, pay attention. Probably going to go through it pretty quickly. If you really don't like research, just hold on. I'll go through it pretty quickly. And so what we're going to be talking about here is that there's been some research over the years about why focusing in on negative symptoms is going to be important. Right, for a long time, people thought, oh, individuals don't really have negative symptoms, right? It's a really small subset. And what they found is that that negative symptoms are much more likely to exist, right? So people are much more likely to have negative symptoms. And negative symptoms are more associated with poor functioning, more associated with poor quality of life, and actually that they're more associated with going back to the hospital, right? So negative symptoms are more predictive of going back to the hospital than hallucinations and delusions, right? The positive symptoms, and neurocognition, those problems with attention and memory and those things, right? So if in your work, you are in the stay out of the hospital, have a better quality of life, and do more in your life business, then negative symptoms is where we should be focusing our attention, not on all of these other sort of side hustles that come up in the work that we do. But let's take it out of some of this research stuff. Let's just think about this from a very basic, like sort of like pragmatic standpoint, right? Let's just sort of like good horse sense, right? So we're talking, if you think about the negative symptoms, right? They're problems with motivation and they're problems with connection. Right? I'm not motivated to engage in purposeful, meaningful activities, and I'm not motivated to connect with other people, right? So ultimately what we're talking about is isolation and then not doing much. But think about what happens when we start to isolate and we do less in our lives, right? You have more time to listen to distressing voices. You have more time to worry about being persecuted. You have increased stress, and then you stop taking in any new information in your environment. So the negative symptoms, those problems with motivation and those problems with connection, actually create a fertile ground for every other symptom to get worse. For years now, I've been asking, I can't think of any symptom that gets better when you isolate, don't talk to other people, and don't do anything. And listen, if you've got one, put it in the Q&A. I'd be curious about that. But you think about problems with self-injury, you think problems with drugs and alcohol, you think about problems with reactions following a traumatic event. I don't ever see any of those things getting better. So one of the problems that the individuals we serve struggle with is that they actually have this really fertile ground on which all other potential pathology or symptoms can bloom from. And so that's the reason why we want to address and attack the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So for a long time, people, excuse me, for a long time, people just thought of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. They used to call it holes in the head schizophrenia, right? The idea that it's just people have these sort of problems with attention and memory and all of those things, right? That their brain's sort of like busted. And then as a result, they have these sort of other symptoms, right? You know, they don't go do things, they don't connect with other people. And so there isn't much of a psychology to it. And so Dr. Beck, when he asked, how can I help with schizophrenia? You know, when he thought to come back, you know, in his career to schizophrenia. I don't know if people know this. People know Beck for cognitive therapy for depression. But one of the things, Beck's first, I think it's his first paper, but it's the first case study that was ever published of a successful treatment of schizophrenia, of a delusion. And ironically, it was Beck treating a person with schizophrenia. And it was a case study that he published in 1952. So then Beck comes full circle at the end of his career, and this is sort of the things that get him the most excited now. And so Beck approached the negative symptoms the same way as he approached every other experience that he tackled in his career. He went out and he talked with the people who were experiencing them. And he started finding that there were these things they kept telling themselves, right? These lessons they had learned about the world, right? That what we would call beliefs or automatic thoughts. And then once he started to identify this pattern of thinking, Beck really starts to, once he identifies this pattern of thinking, then Beck starts to study, you know, do those explain some of the relationships? And once he identifies that there's a belief that's worth targeting, he develops a treatment to target that. And so that's the process that Beck went through that ultimately became recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. So what Beck finds is that there is a psychology to these experiences that people have. He finds that individuals with the negative symptoms, the problems with avolition, those problems with motivation and engaging in purposeful activity, that those individuals harbor a set of beliefs, right? These defeatist beliefs of why try, things aren't going to work out anyway. A little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. Another group of people also had this sort of conservation of energy belief, right? I can't do it until I get the energy. And anybody who's ever sort of laid around all day, your energy goes down. It doesn't go up. There was another group of people who didn't socialize, right? They didn't want to connect with other people. And they had these sort of social disinterest beliefs. And what he found is that those beliefs actually predicted whether they were likely to socialize. And these individuals had sort of soured on the idea of socializing with other people. Equally, he found that when you think about anhedonia, which actually, interestingly, individuals with schizophrenia don't experience anhedonia. They actually can experience pleasure at the same rate as normals do. They just don't anticipate experiencing pleasure, so they don't try. Think about it. If I told you that this movie wasn't very fun, you wouldn't go see the movie, right? Same thing for these individuals, but when they don't engage in the activity, they conclude that it wasn't going to be enjoyable anyway. And then we have alogia, right? That like not talking way that people don't connect. If you think about alogia, we know that symptom gets worse over the course of an individual's experience of the illness. And so when we're thinking about alogia, we're really thinking about this idea that individuals learn the lesson. They learn, you guys don't want to hear what I'm talking about anymore. You don't want to hear what I'm saying. And so those individuals stop talking as much, right? So it's that sort of negative expectation again. So, so when we're talking about the defeatist performance belief, this idea of I can't do it in, when we're talking about sort of the beliefs associated with motivation, the first one is this idea of conserving energy. I can't do it until I get the energy. But I want you to think about, anybody here ever have like a Sunday or a Saturday and you wake up and you're like, I'm going to sort of wait around and I'm going to see, I'm going to wait for the morning show, right? And you kind of lay around and you don't do anything all day. And then all of a sudden, it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're still in your pajamas and you haven't done anything. You ever notice on those days, it's like the idea of getting up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon off the couch is like Herculean. It's like impossible to think about getting up, right? So the couch or the bed, it's like an energy vampire, right? The other thing is if you ever sort of hit the snooze button, you keep hitting the snooze button. But the opposite, it might be true as well. Anybody here ever go and you just get up early and you're like, I could get that first load of laundry going. And before you know it, it's like 9 a.m., all of your laundry's done, you've food shopped, you've repainted 3 of the bedrooms, right? Like everything gets going and you have more energy to do it, right? So it's this idea that we know that energy, that activity precedes energy. And so we need individuals to learn that lesson, right? The less you do, the lower the energy you have, right? And when you have lower energy, you go, I really need to conserve this energy in case I need it, right? In case something comes up and I need to protect myself, I need to make sure that I conserve that energy. The next one has to do with these defeatist performance beliefs. We were talking a little bit about it before. I want sort of all of you guys on the call right now, again, I want you just to sort of think about all 601 of you. I want you to think about, for a second, going to work on Monday or tomorrow, and I want you to think about that really long queue of notes that you have to complete for work. Okay, and now I want you to imagine telling yourself, why start them? I'm never going to get through them anyway. Are you more likely or less likely to get kicking on those notes? Right, less likely, right? You're going to have caught up on all of the Facebook that you need to. You'll have solved 2 more Candy Crush levels, right? But it's sort of like, it's really hard, right? If you think a little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe, what they found was, and this is an interesting study from a guy named Eric Granholm, and he's out of UC San Diego. And what he found is that these individuals actually engage in activities, right? A lot of times we thought they just don't do anything, right? They kind of like lay around, they don't do much. But what Granholm finds is that they actually are engaging in activities, but they give up early. He actually measured how much their pupils dilated. And he found that individuals with defeatist performance beliefs, they engage in purposeful activity. They give out effort. But people who don't have these beliefs continue to exert the effort and are successful. But the individuals with the defeatist performance beliefs, right, this why try, it's not going to work out anyway, they kind of poop out earlier. And so what happens is they're constantly putting out energy and being unsuccessful because they don't put in enough energy to get to that success experience. And so they're actually caught in this constant cycle of reinforcing the idea of a little mistake is a complete catastrophe. Things don't work out anyway when you try. They actually continually confirm their own beliefs. Also, a group of individuals really harbor these sort of social disinterest beliefs, right? They just don't really, they really feel like, you know, time with other people isn't worth the effort. And it's not that they don't want these relationships. They believe that that other people could have it, right? So they look out and they go, you know, Jennifer and Miriam, they can have it. They're going to have a great time, but it's just not for me. I'm not going to be allowed to have these experiences. And so they really learn this idea that time with other people isn't worth the effort. So they stay by themselves. But when they avoid socializing, they really conclude, see, it wasn't going to be worth it anyway. It wasn't going to be worth putting out the effort anyway. Which is really sort of the tragedy of these experiences. One of the people who did a lot of these interviews, a guy I used to know, he talked about going and doing these interviews with these individuals who had been ill for maybe 50 years. And they were off the charts on all of these beliefs. And many people had sort of written these individuals off as that they're not interested, you know, they're really like, this isn't stuff that they want at all. So it's sort of like a no-brainer. And he tells this story of walking out and all of a sudden this guy just stops them and goes, "Hey, doc, where is it?" And this guy, and he said, "Well, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, where's what?" He goes, "Where's my life? Where's my family? Where's my car? Where are my friends? I'm 70 years old and I have nothing." So on one hand, these individuals endorse all of these beliefs about it's not worth it, why try, time with other people isn't worthwhile. And yet we're led to believe that internally they do yearn for these experiences. They wish for them. And it's important for us to remember that. So once Beck identified all of these, some of these beliefs and many of these beliefs, and really saw that they sort of explained some of the relationships, he realized that he could target that belief, right? So why try, it's not going to work out anyway, or a little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. That's pretty testable, right? We could go right out this door here and try something out right now. And so what Beck does is he starts a series of, he does a clinical trial, right? Which is very typical of Dr. Beck. And so what he did was he looked at a clinical trial. They really targeted individuals who had a lot of these negative symptoms, problems with motivation and problems with connection. And so what he did is he compared standard treatment to adding cognitive therapy to standard treatment. And really, for what it's worth, I think it's important to understand these individuals were getting really good standard treatment. Like they weren't getting like mistreated and things like this. You know, we know the people who are providing the standard treatment in Philadelphia, right? So they were actually getting really good standard treatment. And so then they added cognitive therapy to standard treatment. And so it was an interesting outcome because our outcome was functioning, right? Like doing stuff in your life. And what we found is that the individual, and these are all expressed in what are called effect sizes, which sort of describe sort of the difference between the outcomes. So what they found is that they had sort of a better functioning at the end of the treatment. They had reduced avolition and apathy. If you remember, avolition and apathy, that's that reduction in motivation. So if you reduce a reduction, you get two things. One, you get a very angry English teacher for using a double negative. And two, if you reduce a reduction, you actually get an increase in motivation. So we had better functioning, increased motivation. And the interesting thing that we found is that we actually had a reduction in positive symptoms, right? The hallucinations and delusions went down as well. But do you remember that was not what we were targeting? We actually weren't targeting individuals with hallucinations and delusions. We were targeting a different set of symptoms, right? The problems with motivation and the problems with connection. So then we followed it up, right? 6 months after we removed the treatment, we found that the gains were maintained, right? So it wasn't just that you got to hang out with like a really chipper, nice guy or woman. It's that at the end of it, after we had removed the treatment for 6 months, they continued to have better functioning. They continued to have a reduction in the negative symptoms. But the interesting thing is they also maintained the reduction in the positive symptoms, the hallucinations and delusions, right? Which really starts to sort of carve out a new way of thinking about what we're going to be doing in the treatment. We also looked at, during the follow-up we looked at individuals who had a longer length of illness and individuals had a shorter length of illness, right? And they defined length of illness as 10 years. And what they found is that individuals with a shorter length of illness actually started to respond at the 6-month mark, right? But individuals with a longer length of illness, defined as more than 10 years, they start to respond, but they don't respond till the follow-up, right? So 6 months after the treatment has been removed. And so there's two things. One, this is going to be really helpful for individuals who are early on in their illness. They're going to respond pretty quickly. But the other thing is this, is that nobody is beyond recovery, right? We have no way of knowing who's going to recover and who's not. And so we just keep applying the treatment and adjusting, applying the treatment and adjusting, right? And that's going to be a really crucial thing for us to focus in on. As Dory said in Finding Nemo, you just keep swimming, right? Just keep going. And eventually we should be able to find the key that unlocks it. This is just some amazing research that comes out of my friends in the UK. I'm super jealous that they get to do this, because there's no IRB or funding source in the United States that would ever allow me to do this treatment. But what Toni Morrison has systematically led this, this course of intervention around doing CBT for psychosis for individuals who are not on medicine, or as I like to call it, look ma, no meds. So the important thing, there's a couple important things to pull from this. One, that CBT works perfectly well if an individual is not on medicine. But a different piece of it that's really important is we don't have to wait for the medicines to work anymore in order for us to start the treatment. So CTR and CBT has no, you need to be this tall to ride this ride thing. You don't need to be this stable. So anytime you hear somebody saying like, whoa, we can't start CBT until they're stable, not the case. So I've got amazing friends and colleagues who are psychiatrists, and what they do is amazing, right? They're so good. And I let them do the psychiatry and medicine, and I get down to working with individuals to move toward their life. Because here's the important part about it. There's a group of people who will never respond to medicine. So if I wait to start my treatment as a psychologist, right, as a non-prescriber, until the individual responds to medicine, we could be waiting until I get my silver watch and forever. And I don't think it's fair to wait. So anybody who's a non-prescriber, and I'll be honest, the psychiatry residents I've trained who are prescribers, we need to figure out where we start no matter what, whether the medicines are working, whether somebody wants to take the medicine, whether they believe they have a problem, whether they don't believe they have a problem, right? Treatment starts the moment you show up to my office. And so that's really one of the beautiful pieces that you can take away from the work that Toni has done. The other interesting thing is he's recently completed a head-to-head comparison of medicine versus CBT versus a combination of medicine and CBT. And so that's just, he's continuing to push this study forward. So let's think about what is this cycle of recovery that we're talking about here, right? What Beck really starts to think about at the end of the study is this, is that as you increase the motivation with individuals, they start doing more in their life. They sort of fill their life space with activity and things, right? As we start to increase our life space, right, you have less time for the junk in your brain, right? The hallucinations and delusions. And that's all hallucinations and delusions are, right? They're sort of like it's sort of the mess in your brain. But think about it. If you stopped hearing hallucinations and delusions as much, you start feeling a little bit more motivated to do stuff, which leads you to do a little bit more. And as you start doing a little bit more, you have less time for the hallucinations and delusions, which means that you'll become a little bit more motivated. And so whereas frequently people spend time focusing in on the hallucinations and delusions, in CTR, we're gonna really focus in on the issue of motivation. That's where we're going to start a lot of our work. Because ultimately, if we can get people doing more, we really like starve out the hallucinations and delusions, right? They just don't have as much energy. And so you're not trying to fight this delusion when it looks like, a 2-ton gorilla trying to attack you, right? We're going to deal with it when it's a really small. Anybody remember the little sea monkeys that you used to get from the carnival? That's when we're going to deal with them. If ever, there are a lot of people who we've never had to go around and sort of address that. So what we're talking about here is these sort of 2 types of modes. This is a great way to think about it, right? There's sort of this adaptive mode, and then there's this patient mode. Has anybody here ever, anybody here, and we're all friends now, right? We've known each other for a half hour now. So anybody here out of the 615 you ever go in and you're asking an individual all the really good questions you're supposed to ask them, right? Maybe about their medicine and what they've been doing and whether they're going to group and, all the stuff that we have to ask them, right? Anybody and, ask those questions and start getting like, yup, nope, yup, nope, like just one word answers. So here's where we'll all be honest. Raise your hands. Anybody here ever just get tired one day and go, just get tired of asking all those same questions you have to ask all the time and then just give up and go, do you think the Cowboys are going to get to play this year? And then all of a sudden, this person is giving you one word answer. Out of nowhere, it just sort of explodes into dialogue. They give you a whole dissertation on what the Cowboys need to do, how it's going to work out, how the testing could work better, how they could isolate, right? All of a sudden, this person who couldn't give you 2 answers is now able to give you a dissertation. And it's sort of interesting. And it's true of anything, whether it's sports, whether it's cooking, whatever it is. This person just sort of comes to life. So a lot of people who I talk to and I train go, oh, that guy, he won't talk to you about anything. I mean, unless you talk to him about the Cowboys and then he'll talk your ear off. And this is the moment when you really get to know me and you're like, oh, wait, he really is a cognitive behavioral therapist. Because if you tell me that he won't talk to you about anything, but he talks to you about the Cowboys, he will talk to you. He just doesn't want to talk to you about your topic. He finds it boring. So what we're talking about here is there is this mode that we can elicit from the individual when they have much more access to the sort of mental resources. They're much more alive, right? It's sort of like the old person sort of comes, you know, like a phoenix from the ashes, rises. But equally so, we can elicit a mode that really elicits that patient quality, where a lot of their symptoms are vibrant, you know, are really prominent. And so possibly these symptoms are elicited by the therapist. So it's not that the individual has a problem, it's the way that we're approaching them, right? We as clinicians, as providers, must take some responsibility for what's going on in the room. And so what we're talking about here is that these individuals, when you ask these questions about, did you shower today? Did you use soap? Aren't we activating that network of beliefs around, I'm broken, I'm just a schizophrenic, why try, nothing works out anyway? I mean, just imagine it, right? Especially, let's take the people who work with first episode folks right now. And I think that's a lot of the people on this. I want you to imagine that you were on the swim team, right? And you were doing amazing things, and they were grooming you so that you could qualify to swim in the Olympics. You're a breaststroker, and that's the way that you're gonna get there. And everybody, your family has linked their future on you. They're so excited. And then by hook or by crook, you become ill. And all of a sudden, everybody forgets you. You're out of all of your classes. You're sitting at home. You've been in and out of a hospital. And then all of a sudden, somebody who looks a lot like me starts walking into the room and going, have you washed today? Did you use soap? Did you brush your teeth? The upper teeth and the bottom teeth? Is it possible, just possible, that we might sit there and go, what happened? How did I go from being the captain of the swim team to being asked if I used soap today? And so there's a way in which the things we ask the individuals that we serve elicits this sense of being broken. We're almost getting them an embroidered an embroidery that says, congratulations, you're messed up. And so then we're surprised when these individuals don't want to talk to us, when they don't want to do things, when they don't see any purpose in meeting with us. So what we're going to start to do is focus in on, what if we built all of our interactions and all of our therapy around the times that individuals are more likely to talk to us, right? Because listen, anybody on this call, watching this keynote, anybody who's a cook, right? Raise your hand if you're a cook. Awesome, me too. If you asked me about what I'm gonna make when this keynote session is over and after I go to the conclusion of the session, which everybody should do, if you ask me what I'm gonna cook, I'll talk your ear off for a half hour. Don't worry, the moderators, I'm not going to do that. Anybody here not a cook? Yeah, I see you guys out there too. Anybody here who's not a cook ever ask a person who's a cook what they're gonna cook for dinner, and that's like 20 minutes of your life you'll never get back again? So when we structure the conversations that we're going to have, and we structure our sessions about getting a person in a mode where they have access to the energy, access to the ideas of thinking forward, we get an individual. The reason we call it adaptive is because they're adaptive, they're malleable. Their brains are online and they have all of this mental energy that we can focus on anything that we want to do. But when we activate this patient mode, right, we really prime these sort of beliefs they have about being broken. We can't be surprised that they show us that these symptoms of being broken come forward. So I'm gathering at probably 42 minutes into this thing, you guys are like, okay, cool, but what does this therapy look like? So let me give you a quick overview, and I might give you sort of a case example to go along with it, if that's okay. If it's not okay, it's gonna be a problem because, I mean, I've got slides that match that. So I hope you guys are okay with that. So when we're talking about CTR, instead of starting the therapy by going, are you hearing voices? Have you showered today? Did you brush your teeth? Do you still believe the FBI is after you? We're actually going to switch the way that we're going to do it. We're actually going to start by activating that mode, right? We're going to engage people right away, walking in the door. We're going to activate them in those things that bring out that adaptive mode. Right? Those things we're going to ask about sports. We're going to ask about cooking. We might go for a walk. We might throw a ball. Right? We might look at a trailer. Right? But the idea of activation is we're going to elicit enough of that adaptive mode, and we're really going to activate that network of beliefs and thoughts and energy so that the individual has energy to put into the treatment. Almost like if you've ever built a fire, a campfire, right? You know, the way that you build a campfire is that you slowly get a couple sparks and you build it up slowly with kindling. Once you get that fire going, you can burn the worst wood ever. It could be wet, it could be sappy, and that fire will go up like that. So that's what we're going to do here. Right? We're going to activate it. We're going to do those things, those times when an individual is more likely to engage with us. Once we have that person engaged, we can start talking about the things that they want to be doing in their lives, right? Those things they want to be doing, the things that they want to have, right? Right, what we call aspirations. They're way beyond goals, right? The individuals we serve, they've been goaled to death, right? What we're really looking for are aspirations, those big picture items, the things that really we dream about, right? Because how many people on here when you were 7 years old thought, gosh, when I grow up, I really hope I can name all of my medicines? How many of you guys ever thought, I hope I can name each of the symptoms of my illness? Respond by the third cue. If they didn't motivate you when you were 7, why would they motivate you now? And remember, we're talking about a disorder that is encapsulated by this problems with motivation. So ultimately, we need something really motivating to provide the motivation. So we're really looking for these big picture things, right? I want to dance at my daughter's wedding, right? I want to teach my son how to cook, right? I want to get a dog and rescue a dog from a high kill shelter, right? And teach her how to fetch. These big picture things. I want to get my own apartment so I can cook for my mom because she's getting older and I want to take care of her because it's scary out there with all of the things in COVID. I just want to make sure my mom's okay, right? Those are those things that motivate us, that get us excited. I want to be a psychologist so I can talk with a conference of 626 people. These are the things that ultimately motivate us. Once we get that aspiration, here's an interesting thing. We're not going to break it down to the steps that we're going to do. Once we get it, we want to get that aspiration really vivid. Dr. Beck used to say to me all the time, he goes, Aaron, you should, the aspiration should be so vivid that you know the breed of dog that that the individual wants in their apartment. Right? Like, so that's how detailed it should be. And so really what we're going to be looking at is making it really vivid. Because think about it. Think how exciting it can be when you start dreaming about, like, what's your apartment going to be like, right? You know, are you going to paint the walls? Are you going to have it like all white? Are you going to have people over, right? That vividness. Once you get that vivid where you can sort of step into those aspirations that you want. At that point, we can start breaking it down, right? As a clinician, as a provider, once I get a really vivid aspiration, I love to turn and go, that sounds awesome. Can I help? So all of a sudden, we're into this process where we're working together to move toward the things that they want, right? Where we break it down to what are concrete steps we can do right now? Those are the times where we can make it specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time limited. And those will be really smart goals, right? It's really what we're looking at are the accomplishable steps to get to where we want to get to. And those should be changing constantly. What I work with on my individual today at 3:30, I shouldn't be working on with that same individual a month from now. It should be changing along the way. As obstacles pop up in the way of getting toward those aspirations, we're going to target those with really wonderful formulations that we have and really wonderful interventions that we know. Some of them drawn straight out of CBT for psychosis or other interventions that we know, but that's where we're going to make that happen. The conceptualization is the key to tackling all of those obstacles. As we start to realize those aspirations, we learn things about ourselves. We learn things about ourselves, about the future, about the world. Because I'll tell you, my provider could tell me how good I am all the time. But when I sit there in the garage and I sit with my son and the two of us put together our first garden in a pot, right, of tomatoes, basil, because later on in the season, we're going to be able to make tomato sauce out of that, or gravy if you're from Philly. As we do that, you learn really important things about yourself as you sit with your own son and teach him to cook. What do you learn? I am, right, a good dad. I'm valuable. I'm connected. What does it mean about the future? Yeah, right? My future has more possibilities. I could continue to get better. And anybody out there who is a cook will tell you, if you pay attention to your voices and you don't pay attention to the sauce, you're having burnt sauce and you still can't help with the voices. So at the end of the day, it's less time to be doing that. As I'm working with my son, I don't have time for these other experiences. As we work on teams, the whole team is one therapist. We all work together in that one method to move the ball forward. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about CTR and how it's going to work forward. So here's just an example of a case. It's sort of like an amalgam of a bunch of different cases. It was a guy who was served by a team that I supervised. And so the problem that they had was that this guy, whenever they'd come to his door, he would scream and yell at them, right? And he would even throw things at them from his window, which seems to make it difficult to get your billable out, to get your billable units if won't let you in the door. And so I asked this team, I said, well, what do you do? And they go, well, we walk up and we go, hi, it's Aaron from the ACT team. I'm here to, work with you. And then the guy starts cursing and yelling at them and then throwing stuff at them. And I go, So can you tell me more about it? And so the guy believed that they were all his employees, right? And he would scream and yell at them because he thought, one, that they were breaking into his office and using drugs in the office. But he also believed that they were selling drugs out of the office to make money to buy more drugs to use. And so do we all agree, just as a sort of a point of reference before we go forward, do we all agree that on some level, at some point, somebody on the team had instructed this man that they are not his employees, that they are his therapists, and that he's on an ACT team? We all agree that that happened, correct? Awesome, just wanted to check. And so what do you guys think happened when they said, listen, we're not your employees, we're your therapists. We're here to provide therapy for you. Absolutely, right? He would just start screaming and yelling and going, how dare you talk to me? I'm going to write you up. And he'd start slipping write-up slips under the door over and over and over again. What do you think they asked him next? Yep, exactly. They'd say, did you take your meds? And he'd go, take my meds? Take my meds? How is taking my meds going to make my employees perform better? And they're like, so that's no. And then it went from there. It did not go well. So we're in supervision, and I said, are you willing to try something? And they were like, yeah. And I go, do you ever notice stuff? Do you ever hear stuff when you walk up to the door? And they're like, yeah, he's always watching some form of a sport. There's some sort of sports TV on there. You know, it could be NASCAR, it could be football, but he always has the sports on TV. I go, oh. And I go, so I said, what I want you to do next time you walk up to the door is I want you just to walk up, and I just want you to knock on the door and go, hi, it's Aaron, and I wanted to know what's going on with the Cowboys? And they're like, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm like, how's yours working? And they're like, fair point, and they did it. And so they walk up and they knock on the door. Hi, it's Aaron from the ACT team. What's going on with the Astros? And he goes, how dare you show up for your show? Oh, you got to see this. You're never going to believe it. They traded this guy away, and now they've got that person. He just sort of walks them in. So the next person goes up and goes, I really don't know sports that well. So I go, what's going on with the Cowboys? Oh, well, you're never going to believe it. So the coach, you'll never believe what he did. They walk him in. So the third person walks up and says, I feel really worried about this because I feel like he's going to start catching on. Like, why are we all asking him about sporting teams? I'm like, okay. I said, so what do you have going on? And he goes, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm trying to fix like sort of my bathroom, and there's sort of like this dripping faucet. So give it a shot. And so the person walked up and goes, I've got a dripping faucet in my bathroom, and I don't know what to do. And he goes, you are hopeless. Come here. Okay. Do you have a wrench? Right? And so they basically started doing sports, house repairs. Sports, house repairs. And sure enough, he's not yelling at them anymore, right? He's not screaming at them anymore. The other thing that's going on, we knew that he was hearing voices saying that his employees were stealing from him and selling drugs. Well, if now he's watching to sort of report back between sessions because he knows somebody's going to be coming to ask him about that, he's paying a little bit more attention when he's watching sports. Have you ever watched sports all day and then like sort of zoned out? That's what's happening. Well, when you zone out, that's a great time for us all to start listening to our hallucinations and delusions a little bit more. So that was sort of the process that he had going on. So what happened was the team lead, who was really just an amazing team lead, decided that she was going to try to make the next step. And so all of a sudden she walks up and she goes, they're talking about what's going on in basketball, and all of a sudden she goes, this is really awesome. What else would you want to be doing? What else would you want to get? He goes, I really want to help people. She's like, tell me more about that. He goes, I don't know if you know this, but people who are homeless can't get jobs because they don't typically have clothes for job interviews. And because they show up and they're not really dressed for a job interview, they don't get those jobs. So I'd love to collect clothing for those people. And so all of a sudden she goes, can I help? And he goes, sure. So now they're doing all these things, but now he's going around and he's collecting clothing for people. As he continues to do that, he's hearing his voices a little bit less. He's less focused in on them all being sort of bad employees. And really think about it for a second. When he was yelling and cussing at them about being bad employees, what was he trying to do? He was trying to help them. He was trying to guide them. But that was the only way that he had. And the less people listened to him, the more he would yell at them. And so it really becomes this process this process that he goes through. So as he continues to collect clothes for people, they step him down off of the ACT team, but they make sure that he starts to correct some of the things he thinks about himself, like that he can connect with other people, right? That he does matter, that he has power in his life. And they have him start noticing it and helping him notice that, you know, the more you talk with people, the more they're likely to listen. The more you yell at them, the more they're likely to retreat. And so ultimately he starts learning these lessons about himself, others, and the future. It is an interesting thing. He, you know, once he stepped down off the ACT team, he still visited them, but not as employees, but really just to sort of check in and see how's the work going, but in a real normal way, right? Because he had this valuable connection that he had developed with him. But as he went out into the world, that learning was really quite durable. He continued to maintain that learning as he went out into the world. So when we're talking about it, we're talking about this as a protocol, right? CTR has this very specific order. It's a lot like doing surgery, right? In surgery, you have to wash your hands and then do the surgery, but the order is really important. Same thing in CTR, right? You need to have the person sufficiently activated, right? Before you try and get the aspirations. Once you get the aspirations, you really need to make sure they're vivid before you move into taking action steps forward. Great way to think about activation is if you had $100 in your bank account and you wrote a check for $100.01, your check would bounce. If you had $1 million in your bank account and you wrote the check for $100.01, the check would go through perfectly well. And so it's better to be a little bit on the too much activation side than trying to jump through it really fast. Because people oftentimes think of this step here, activation, as this thing that we need to rush through, right? So we can get to the real therapy. But we're going to talk right now about how this is the real therapy. This is the part that starts to test out these beliefs the individual has developed about themselves, the future, and the world. So engagement and activation is the systematically activating the adaptive mode. One of the things it does is it inoculates against symptoms. If I'm talking to you about the Cowboys, I can't be listening to my voices, right? You can't talk and listen at the same time, or at least that's what my mama keeps trying to explain to me. It increases the cognitive resources, right? Think about the last time you got into a really exciting discussion about what you're gonna make for dinner, or your favorite place that you wanna go on vacation, right? All of a sudden you're super awake. I don't care how exhausted you are. I don't care if you just moved from Philadelphia to Nashville, Tennessee. You start talking about something that's really exciting, all of a sudden you'll have as much brain juice as you need. And it starts to focus people on alternative possibilities. So if we engage in this game together, maybe things do work out. Maybe things are more enjoyable than we think. Maybe there is a way to stop my voices. Maybe they are a little controllable. The outcome of it, though, is really that we have enough mental energy to elicit those aspirations. Aspirations are those personal, meaningful, valued sort of aspirations, those big picture things. And it really serves as this ongoing internal source of engagement. When it's really vivid, and we get it really vivid, it continues to be this engine to drive us forward. Because if you think I'm going to be excited to work with you and do stuff because we watched, Cats with Lightsabers, imagine how motivated I'm going to be when I think about teaching my daughter how to throw a fastball. It's going to be much more motivating. I'm going to show up ready to work at the idea that I might be able to sort of go hiking with my son again. Aspirations really orient our treatment, right? That mountain that we're going to climb together, that thing I want to do so badly, everything else that comes up, it's either relevant or irrelevant based off of where I want to go. It becomes the rationale for treatment, right? Taking action is the best way to get back into school and get a degree and become a psychologist, right? That's the best way forward. It also serves as an initial form of relapse prevention. Because listen, I've been a dad for like 12 to 14, well, I've been a dad for 14 years. I was gonna say 12 to 14-year-olds because I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. Tomorrow, I'm not gonna be like, did the dad thing, I'm cool, thanks, right? And so the things that have made me successful as a father, that have made me well, that have kept me here, I'm gonna continue to do because that aspiration of being a good dad is an aspiration that's going to drive me forward. And so instead of sort of packaging up all of this wellness because wellness is good, we're going to package it up because I want to help people in my life, people who have been stuck in hospitals the way I've been. I want to help those people. And so ultimately we're going to package it in there. And so all of the stuff that I'm doing right now to be well, I'm going to continue doing because it's going to continue to allow me to continue helping people in their life. The outcome is it's the motivation for action, and it also serves as this wonderful ongoing engagement topic. I can activate an individual by logging in and talking to them about their aspiration like that, right? I could probably, if I knew some of the things you guys are looking forward to, probably could get any of you activated. In workshops, I sometimes ask somebody if they're anybody going on a vacation. I can get that person who tells me about their vacation for the rest of the workshop, whether it's a 3-day workshop, whether it's a 5-day workshop, I can get that person to smile and light up like that, just talking about their vacation. It just works. It's the way that we all work. Action, right? We're going to plan and evaluate the increasing activity, right? And the idea that we're going to learn some lessons that activity leads to increased energy, increased motivation, right? Sort of the more you do, the better you feel. We can also start to notice that stuff in our minds seem to bother us a little bit less when we're more active, right? So starting to notice, oh, you were out all day and you didn't hear those things the way that you normally hear those things. Do you know, I wonder if that's true other times. So starting to connect activity with decreased experiences of psychosis. And then the most important thing is all of this activity that I'm increasing, I'm moving toward the things that I want to be doing in my life. The outcome is a schedule of action and then learning these lessons about the benefits of activity. And ultimately, we start to correct some of the beliefs that we have about ourselves, right? As obstacles pop up, and they will, whether they're obstacles to starting treatment and obstacles to engagement in any treatment at all, right? Or whether they're obstacles in activities. So think about it. If I want to get to school and I realize that going out for walks is a great way to get myself in a good space and to feel healthier, which would make it easier to be at school because I won't feel so self-conscious. All of a sudden, if I notice that when I walk out of the house, I start hearing voices saying, everybody hates you. They know you're from the north. They know you're disgusting. And they're all laughing at you. And so then I run back inside and I don't go out for my morning walk. That's an obstacle that we can tackle, right? We're going to target it. We're going to use a really good formulation. For some individuals, we're going to start with a real generic formulation. We have all of these formulations of obstacles, right? Whether they're voices, whether they're delusions, whether they're negative symptoms. We have these sort of generic formulations that research has identified are common to these problems. And then as we work with an individual, we're going to tailor those formulation. We're going to tailor the formulation and then develop interventions that neutralize the obstacles much more permanently. So for example, there's a whole series of beliefs about voices. And later on, you can, I think they recorded my session from yesterday, so you can watch that. Or on my website, I've got a whole webinar on voices. But if I believe that the voices come and go as they please, I'm more likely to isolate. So we can start testing some of those ideas out, right? We can work it out. We're looking for really concrete testing of these beliefs. So the restructuring that we're talking about is a very experiential learning, right? I was once having lunch with Dr. Beck, and he turned to me and he goes, do you ever think that you've turned cognitive therapy into exposure therapy, right? So we want to sort of learn things through doing things, right? And so we're going to identify the exact cognition. We're going to check the cognition, and then we're going to come up with a more helpful or accurate cognition, and then we're going to change the behavior. But we're going to do all of these things through experience, right? We're going to get up and we're going to get walking. The most beautiful thing that I recently saw, I saw Christine Podesky, who her and Dennis Greenberger wrote Mind Over Mood, you may know. And if you don't, I suggest you look into it. It's a wonderful resource. But Chris gave a keynote address at the World Congress of CBT, where she addressed questions where she was talking about guided discovery. And Chris really talks now that most of guided discovery should be done out of your seats. Guided discovery is not talking somebody out of their thoughts. It's getting up and doing stuff, right? Going and touching and figuring stuff out, right? That's the way that we get better. And so ultimately we want to restructure some of those beliefs underneath. And that's where long-term recovery happens, right? So I call it cognitive therapy because I think all interventions are ultimately cognitive interventions, because the only reason we're doing them is to shift the way that you see the world. So that is how we're going to use the protocol. There was a great clinician in California who said, so let me get this right. In the protocol, we're creating an experience. And that experience allows the individual to learn from it. And I think that's just a beautiful way of capturing what we're doing. This protocol of activation, aspirations, and action will lead to the opportunity for learning. I want to thank you guys for spending time. I'm really excited. I hope there's some really great Q&As. Miriam and I are a fun little dynamic duo that we do, or hopefully. But please hang out for the Q&As, and then make sure we're going to even stop a little bit early so we could jump over for the conclusion session. I really encourage you to attend it. So that way, even though we can't be in a conference like this, we can still have that sense of conference-dom. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hand it over to Miriam, and I'm excited to see what questions we have.
There we go, we got the mic on. Thank you again, Dr. Brinen. Great presentation. Thank you for giving us some alternative ways to really think about some of these subject matters, some of these therapies, the idea of connection and motivation. And we got some great questions, so let's get started. All right. Alicia wants to thank you for the presentation, and she states, some coworkers and I regularly discuss how what is called negative symptoms can come from many sources. Maybe some are primary disease process, but also demoralization, oppression, learned helplessness, self-protection, anticipated stigma, internalized stigma, not feeling welcome, med side effects, and etc. How does recognizing these different causes of what gets lumped together as negative symptoms impact CTR?
So I love that. That's a great question, Alicia. So what I would say is a great starting spot is just saying, let's abandon the concept of primary disease, because unless you have a great primary disease balm that we can put on the primary disease to make it go away, we're kind of out of luck, right? I do agree that a lot of it is the negative symptoms, because the medicines do make the negative symptoms can make them much more prominent. And what you're talking about with demoralization, oppression, learned helplessness, all these great ways of thinking about it is, that's what we're talking about. Why try? It's not going to work out anyway. That's sort of demoralization or learned helplessness. A little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe, right? That's self-protection. You know, people don't want to hear what I have to say anyway, right? That's the internalized stigma. There's an interesting thing, because people love the idea of insight, right? It's so important that we get insight. And the Tanya Lincoln, a brilliant researcher out of Germany, she found that there's no long-term like benefit, like, so you're not more likely to adhere to treatment if you get insight. And other research actually shows that you're more likely to become depressed, which could really be the negative symptoms. So it would be really great if insight gave you all that stuff, but it kind of doesn't, right? You know, like, people aren't doing walks for schizophrenia. It's not like really the most popular thing to get diagnosed with. So saying like you really need to get this insight isn't that helpful. So I think what you're talking about are beautiful. You remember I said there's a generic formulation and a tailored formulation? These ideas here of not feeling welcome and those things, these are all beautiful tailorings of the a little mistake is bad, it's a complete catastrophe, or any of these beliefs that we're talking about. So thank you.
All right, moving on to a question from Tammy. In our FEP program, we often work with minors that come to therapy because their parents want them to. They will often either answer with, I don't know, or it becomes evident that the information shared is what the individual believes the parent wants them to share or the provider wants to hear or work on. How do we activate the motivation for an individual in this situation?
So great question. And anybody who, I mean, this isn't interesting. This isn't an FEP thing. This isn't anybody who's ever talked to an adolescent, much less worked with an adolescent. So I agree with you. I think it's also the thing that gets me sometimes not the most popular with parents, although a really savvy parent usually sees what I'm doing. Not what I'm doing, because I'm really genuine about it. I think it's just about validating that they don't want to be here. I used to look younger. I don't look young anymore, which is fine with me. But like, I oftentimes will say to a kid being like, so mom and dad, you know, dragged you down here, huh? So would you rather be licking an electrical socket than talking to me right now, huh? Especially some old dude like me, because I'll be honest, a lot of you guys on this thing right now probably look super young, but when you walk in and start working for an FEP program, you might as well look like the crypt keeper, right? Like, I don't care how young you look old to the 16-year-old. And so I just sort of chalk it up, and I'm like, listen, if you have to see me, why don't we just get something out of it anyway, right? And so I kind of just like go after it there. And sometimes I find that this sort of like shocking them with being like, yeah, there's no reason for, you know, you don't want to be here, you know? So that type of thing. I think it's just getting them there and then quickly engaging them in being like, so are you a Fortnite player or not? That's what I want to know. And I often sometimes say, listen, all that, I grew up in New Jersey, so I have a horrible potty mouth. But I'm like, all that junk that you want, that they're telling you about, I'm not interested in that. And I don't care what they're talking about with you. I want to figure out where we're going and how I get out of your life as fast as possible. Can we do that? And so it's really kind of getting them like really fast, really kind of engaging them fast. And I think they appreciate the pragmatism. And it's not just me. I've got colleagues in Utah who I've supervised, and they really pick it up. You know, that approach, and they're just amazing at that. And colleagues in Pennsylvania who do that. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Alicia. She wanted to thank you for your presentation. I feel like I learned so much from this. My question is, what if the patient is activated by and wants to talk about their grandiose delusion on their superpowers, and their aspiration is connected to their delusional thinking? I was taught not to play into patients' delusions, but rather to lightly challenge them. Any feedback on that?
Sure, that's a great question. It's a little bit more, and we'll work through it, but it's a little bit more hairy than it is. So one of the things that's really an interesting thing is grandiose delusions ultimately work as a, it's like one of the ways that we think of it as a delusion is a defense. So if I've got to talk to you about my superpowers, you know, think about what would be good about having superpower. I mean, of course, there's nothing bad about having superpowers, right? But if you think about like, what would be good about having superpowers, right? You're special, you're important, people would listen to you, right? Everybody loves Superman, right? So it would be awesome. And so on some level, the opposite is being activated if I have to talk about the superpowers, right? I'm insignificant, I'm broken, people don't care what I have to say. And so what we want to do is we want to activate the beliefs around that sense of, we want to activate the beliefs right away as we jump in that inoculate against it. Right, so being heard, being important, being empowered. And so I'm gonna get, you know, I call it the get them before they get you. Because if they're talking to you about their superpowers, you've been sitting back way too long, or you've done something that has elicited it. So I oftentimes with those young people, or even the older people who have grandiose delusions, jump over the top and go, okay, I don't know, I've got these 2 spices and I'm not sure what to use on my dinner. What should I do? And they're into it. They're talking to me about that. They're not talking about, you know, their X-ray vision, right? Or I come along the side being like, if I listen to my Spotify one more time, I'm going to throw up in my mouth, right? And so what should I listen to? And then we're like listening to music together, right? So you come up over the top of that. And as you build that, we sort of deactivate the grandiose delusion. So that's sort of the short of it. We don't want to be like, yeah, tell me more about your X-ray vision. But we also don't, challenging delusions doesn't really work. It's not helpful.
All right, moving forward to a question from Cabriana. I hope I said that correctly. How would you initially approach a client with this intervention who self-identifies as a nihilist and having no hope, aspirations as part of their identity? And also later on, they also asked about where they could receive more of CTR training.
Well, 2 great questions. So Cabriana, I would say part of that depends on what state you live in. Because I know like in the state of Oklahoma, they're doing it. We're going to be doing some trainings in organizing them at Vanderbilt. So we'll be doing that. And who knows, it might be digital coming up. So, and we do have the manual coming out in December. So as a nice sort of primer to it. So if somebody's describing themselves as nihilist, it's almost the same thing as we were talking about with the grandiose delusion. It's just a sign of like, I don't have any aspirations. That's a sign that we need to sort of come up alongside and we need to activate them more and get more of those things going. And so once we get them activated, it's less about going, please tell me about your, you know, can you please let me know a little bit about your aspirations? You know, what we do is we kind of, it's like an airplane taking off, right? You keep going and then all of a sudden, you know, you just sort of fly away. You get all the energy going and being like, this is awesome, what else? And then we start talking about aspirations going forward. Also the second, or not second, but 70-second thing is there's a whole series of webinars on my website, Recover with CBT. They're free to go view. And so there's lots of different, they're like 1 hour or less than 1 hour snippets of all the different topics. And Cabriana lives in Washington. Oh, if you live in Washington, D.C., or if you live in state, you should talk to Sarah Kapelovich. She does some training on this. Or come to Nashville. It's a cool town.
We're going to squeeze in one more question before wrapping it up for this session. This is from Chris. I'm curious about how this approach may coordinate with voicing hearing approaches that encourage attending to voices and their content as meaningful sources of information.
So that's a great question, Chris. And I think the voice hearing network, which is I think what you're referring to, and the voice hearing experience is a really great organization, and it's really great for normalizing. I think it all gets back to the question about formulation, right? So it's less about what do you always do in every situation, and it's more what do you do for the individual that you're serving. And so I think that that's a really important question to be asking ourselves anytime we start the intervention. And so for some people, the voice hearing network and that type of intervention will be really useful for them. For other people, it's not going to be that useful, and ultimately might lead them down a road of constantly hearing their voices and feeling really badly. And so I think it's just sort of a balance of what's going to help this young person or this specific individual that I'm serving.
Great. I think that wraps up our time. I do want to make a quick mention. There was lots of interest expressed about learning more about CTR training. Someone wanted you to have a podcast, so I'll pass that along. So a lot of praise and a lot of interest in the work that you're doing. If you can clearly one more time state your website for everybody, Dr. Brinen.
Absolutely, I can. It is recoverwithcbt.com. And whoever's talking about Ali Brabin, yeah, Ali is amazing. And I feel like Nev, I know you. I don't remember how. Maybe it's through Twitter. So, yeah. Thank you everybody for joining. Yeah, and I really appreciate it. You know, and I know, please make sure you go to the closing session. But I think, you know, I didn't get to talk about this yesterday, but a lot of my early work was traveling to Georgia, which is such an amazing project for me. And it involved me leaving my kids a lot. So it was a project that took like 6 or 7 years. My daughter, one time, and I think she was like 6 at the time, and she asked me, Dad, why do you have to keep kind of going away? You know, can't you just stay home now? And I said, you know, honey, there's a group of people, who everybody has forgotten. And because you let Dad go down, I've been able to help this group of people, help these folks go back to being mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. And otherwise they would have just been forgotten. I said, do you think anybody should be forgotten? And she's like, no. Now, granted, I think part of it was because there was the number was 100 and she was 6, and that's like a really big number for a 6-year-old. But now we've brought this treatment to thousands and thousands of individuals, and individuals have gone back to their life and really some of them are taking this treatment forward themselves. So I thank you guys, the fact that you guys have taken some time out of your conference to spend it with me. And the fact that your conference took some time out of the conference to bring me in, I thank you. Please be in touch. Look for the trainings as they come up at Vanderbilt. Be well, take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you again in the future. Thank you so much.